Eric, can you hear me?
I can, yes, I can.
Awesome, awesome. I'm gonna turn it over to our board chair. He's gonna open us up and then we'll get started. Go ahead.
Okay.
Liberty County School Board Workshop, Tuesday, March the 2nd, 2021, coming over. Okay.
All right. We have online here Mr. Eric Davis. I'll give y'all just a quick overview and then I'll sit down and shut up. But okay, there's the camera. All right. Sorry, I was talking to them. Eric, we're glad that you're here. Mr. Tim Rebel's here tonight. Tim gave me your name and told me, had I ever heard of the new market tax credit? I told him I had not. He gave me your number, Matt Fuquay's number, the local attorney. And so after I called you, I was very encouraged at the funding possibility that we have here in Liberty County. So anyway, I've shared this with some of the board members. We just wanted to have a workshop tonight to let you kind of explain to them. I know you said you could have done 150 slides or 2 or 3 slides, and you went with the 2 or 3, and we appreciate that.
Yes.
But we want to give you an opportunity tonight to kind of explain that. You're able to see all the board members. We can kind of talk and ask questions, but we're excited at an opportunity to have you be a part of our meeting tonight and tell us that this might be a really good thing for Liberty County. So I want to thank Mr. Tim Rebel for kind of making this happen and getting the connection going. And so we're excited about that. So you're in Seattle. Welcome to Liberty County. So
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you
very much. I know I haven't been back before all this COVID stuff happened. I was in the Panhandle region and in Liberty County at least every month. And so I'm looking forward to coming back very soon and meeting with people in person, including with all of you. So the new market tax credit is a federal program that was established in 2000. It was one of the final acts that Bill Clinton signed before he left office. And we have had funding through the program since 2003. So we've been around program's been existed for more than 20 years, and it has been funded for 18 years, going on 19. It is fundamentally about creating capital to fund projects in low-income communities through a tax credit investor who receives the tax credit in exchange for providing that capital. So it's designed to work specifically in rural low-income communities. And Florida is an underserved state, and Liberty County is almost all the county qualifies for the new market tax credit, including the area where the high school is located. So it's very site-specific. We have to be located in a qualified census tract, and that's determined by poverty rate, unemployment rate, and average family median income. So you meet those tests. The program is complex, but I tend to keep my slides at 3 because I think that this will answer most of at least the basic structure, and then there'll be lots of questions, and I welcome questions as we go through this. So if you have questions as I'm talking, just please go ahead and just speak up, because I'm happy to do that on an interactive basis. So I always start with this chart. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. If someone would let me share my screen so I can put this chart up, unless you already have it up on your screen over there. Right now, I can't share a screen, so I was hoping so you can see it. If you can't, I'll walk through it.
Okay, try it now.
Okay. All right, thank you. Okay. So hopefully you can see this Excel spreadsheet here. This is the basic sources and uses calculation I use. It's a cash flow calculation. And what we'll start is we have our new market tax credit equity. This is our gross subsidy that we receive from the tax credit investor. I assume that.
Eric, can you zoom that in a little bit? We're on a 70 inch TV and it's a little ways from us. Is there any way to zoom that?
I can zoom into it, sure. I can go to 200% magnification. How about that?
Yeah, much better. Thank you.
Does that help?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. And just up front, I'm a CPA, so I tend to be math oriented. So if there's qualitative questions, please just let me know. So the new market tax credit equity is coming from a tax credit investor. There are 7 accredited tax credit investors in the U.S. And Truist Bank, formerly known as SunTrust Bank, is the leading investor in Florida and in the Southeast. So I'd assume they would be the investor here. There are some specific bank questions I may have later, but I just gone ahead and assume that they would be our investor in this in your project. So I've assumed $20 million in new market tax credit allocation. Now the Treasury Department on July 15th of 2020 awarded $3.5 billion for funding for all projects across the United States. Starting in this year in August, I think. We don't know the exact date, but we do know that Congress has already appropriated $5 billion in new market tax credit funding for this year. So that's a 40% increase over what we currently have. And that will really help. But just to be conservative, I assume that we would get $20 million of allocation for your project. So the tax credit calculation, if you can see on my screen, is 20 million. The tax credit investor gets a tax credit of 39% of 20 million, or that would be just under $8 million, so 7.8 million. So the tax credit investor is going to get $7.8 million, and Truist current pricing on the tax credits is 76% of the par value. They receive the tax credit over 7 years. They claim that over 7 years, we get the cash up front. So that's why there's a discount on the par value, and that current pricing is 76 cents. Before COVID, the pricing was 82 cents, and it was 82 cents that would make a big difference. But I'm just going to go ahead and assume that the current pricing is going to remain in effect. So that gives us a gross new market tax credit subsidy before expenses and anything else of $5,928,000. Then we have this thing called bridge equity. So into the program rules, you can either use current leverage, or debt or equity, or you can get credit for prior costs incurred. So my understanding is you just built the brand new high school, and I assumed, just because I don't have the actual numbers, but I assumed, be conservative, that the cost of building the school is 50. I'm assuming that's a reasonable number. Is that close? What the actual cost of building the high school was?
That's 24.
24 million? Okay. Well, then we have some room to work with. So I can find more. If I can find more allocation, then we'll have more room to work with, which is great. But for right now, I just assume 15 million because I'm assuming a $20 million new market tax credit transaction. And if we get more, then we have room to get more. So that's great. So assuming that you paid for all those costs within 36 months of closing, and I would assume the closing date would most likely be, that we'd be looking at would most likely be January or February of 2021, or 2022, excuse me. And assuming that within 3 years prior to that, you spent at least $15 million, then on that school, then we're going to be fine. So that's a $15 million bridge equity that works as a one-day loan, which I'll model how that looks in a minute. But basically, Truist will give the district a one-day loan of $15 million as a source of leverage in the transaction. So now we have $20,928,000 in project costs. And we always have to have some over because of various technical reasons that I won't go into tonight. But we have plenty here. So what's going to be our usage? So that's our cash. These are cash basis transactions. That's how much cash we have at closing. And we have to use that cash. Well, we've got a one-day loan from Truist Bank. We don't need that loan for anything more than just the day loan because we're just giving us leverage for the cost incurred. So the first thing that's going to happen is that day loan is going to get paid off. So that's gone. So we no longer have that. And then what we end up having is we have the vocational building construction, which Kyle, you and I have been talking about, and this is basically based on my calculation of the net subsidy for a $20 million new market tax credit transaction, a conservative estimate of $3,278,000. And I'm assuming that would all be used for the cost of building the vocational building. If this is too high, if the actual cost is lower, then the difference would be reimbursed to the school district at closing and could be used for any purpose. But for right now, I've gone ahead and assumed that the cost of building that building is $3.278 million. So we have $18,278,000 in project costs here. Then we have our transaction fees, and transaction fees are not paid by the school district. They're paid out of the new market tax credit subsidy, the gross subsidy up above. So that gross subsidy again is $5,928,000. So our transaction fees, which again, you don't pay these directly, they're paid out of the new market tax credit program dollars. So $500,000 is my fee, and that's based on the $20 million new market tax credit allocation and I charge 2.5%. Most consultants on rural deals across the country are now charging 3.5%, sometimes 4.5%. I think that's way more than is needed for the work on this deal. So I try to have a reasonable and fair fee for my clients, and every client generally has the same fee, which is 2.5% of the qualified equity investment. Then we have the lawyers and the accountants. So there's going to be, of the total people who work on this transaction, we have your lawyer, who we call our quality counsel. I'll define that term for you in just a minute. And that represents the district, and I have someone that I work with on deals with government agencies and nonprofits, and his name is Alan Pasternak, and he's great. And he has a fixed fee. So he's in here. The investor, let's say it's Truist, has their own counsel. They're in Chicago, and they bill out at very high fees. We've got CDE will have their counsel, and they're going to bill out at high fees. And we've got our project accountant, and they're going to bill out. And then we've got your local counsel. So $450,000 this is based on the cost that we actually paid for the Graceville School project for the Jackson County School Board that closed in January. It was a little less than that, but I think this is a conservative estimate, so I'm going to go ahead and leave budget $450,000 for legal and professional fees. Then the CDE stands for Community Development Entities, and these entities are the special purpose entities that are awarded allocation by the Treasury Department every year. So in August, there's going to be $5 billion in new market tax credit allocation awarded to community development entities for use across the United States. CDEs have a variety of different fees, but I just want to know what the all-in cost is. And from my perspective, I want all those costs paid for out of closing. I don't want you to have to pay any ongoing fees, which is what some of these CDEs like to do. So I just always tell them, just give me the all-in fee because I want it paid for out of closing. I don't want my client to have to pay any ongoing service costs. And so I've projected the total all-in fee at 8.5%. That's probably reasonable. It's probably a little high right now. Most CDEs charge between 7.5% and 8.5%, but I went ahead and budgeted 8.5% just to give the all-in fee, and that fee is $1.7 million. And you may ask, what are CDEs in the business for? They're in the business for two fundamental things. They want to find good projects located in good communities, and rural underserved projects are the highest priority for the program. So that certainly push you up to the top of the list. And the other thing they're in it for is the money. Most of them are for-profit entities, and they do quite well. And what they want is they want good deals so they can get future deals, future allocation to fund more deals so they can make more money. So that's what they're in it for. So the total transaction fees that I'm modeling here are $2,650,000. So we end up with our net subsidy. So the projected subsidy is the gross subsidy of $5,928,000 from above, minus the transaction fees, projected transaction fees of $2,650,000. And this is the actual cash that the district would receive at closing to work with to build the vocational training school. So you'll see vocational training bill, excuse me. So you'll see that this number is exactly the same as this number. because we're using all the subsidy to build it because you don't need to borrow any, don't need any additional leverage. And that works out to a subsidy based on a $15 million in actual project cost of 21.85%. And that's roughly what I would expect the subsidy percentage to be. Generally, the bigger the deal size, the bigger the subsidy is. But as a practical matter, there are limits on what we can get for new market tax credit transactions, and I've just budgeted 20 million just to be conservative. So are there any questions on this page so far that I can answer?
We have some questions that I'm not sure it's appropriate right now. I'll turn this is Jody Bailey. Hey, Eric.
Yes, ma'am.
It's my understanding that this is probably going to be about a 5-year project. Is that correct? This is not, I mean, it takes about a year to do, you know, your work, the legal work, but it's an ongoing 5-year project.
So thank you for that question. So we're basically in between rounds at the moment. So we really can't get any additional allocation right now for the project. So when the next round comes out in August of $5 billion, that's when the clock will start ticking. And that's when I'll find allocation for your project. And it will take about 3 months for CDEs to get serious, and it takes another 3 months to close. So that will give us, and that'll basically sets the timeline in terms of closing. So that's going to give us a January or February closing date, roughly. And then from that point, you would have the cash. You have 18 months to spend this cash. So you have 18 months to spend the $3,278,000. In terms of there's also a compliance period. So there's a 7-year compliance period. And during the compliance period, and that's set because the tax credit investor takes 7 years to receive their tax credits. We get the cash up front, they take the tax credit over 7 years. So during the 7-year compliance period, we have some basic reporting requirements. We also have a new entity that we have to establish, and I'll talk about that in a minute. That is a type 3 supporting organization exclusively for the school district, and that makes the transactions work. And during the 7-year compliance period, we have a responsibility to submit financial statements, and we have a responsibility to submit employment report, just an employment summary report. It's just a 1-page summary report. And then we have a community benefits agreement. So depending on the terms that are negotiated with the parties, and I'll just use the Jackson County School Board as an example. So the Jackson County School Board, when they did their deal, we had to agree to provide annual financial statements, unaudited. But we have audited financial statements because everybody has to have them, so that was fine. We didn't care. And we had to do an annual employment report, which just says how many people are working at that school every year. And we just do that once per year, typically in July, I think. And then we have a community benefits agreement, which is just simply updated based on what we prepared for the transaction. That was part of the documents that were the legal documents of the transaction. And we just simply provide an update on that every year, and that's also due, I believe, in July. That's it. That's all we have to do.
Is there
go ahead.
Is there also a committee that was put together, and I believe that Chris Johnson, which is the school board member there, he's on that committee, and they meet once a year. Is that one of the requirements also?
That is correct. That is correct. So that is called our Qualic B, and that's our type 3 supporting organization. Okay. And our type 3 supporting organization will have to have its own board, and I have a flow chart which I'll kind of model how that structure looks like. But the Qualic B is a special purpose entity that is required to make the transaction work. So as a governmental entity, the school district is not eligible for the new market tax credit transactions without a supporting organization. So we have to set up a type 3 supporting organization that exclusively exists for the school district, and its only job is to actually use the cash to pay for the construction of the new vocational training building, and 2, receive rent payments for that use of that building, and then pay interest payments immediately back to you. You'll see that on my next slide. It only exists for that purpose. has a three-member board. One member is what we call the permanent member. So if we're looking at the Jackson County School Board deal, for example, they use their school board president to be the permanent member of the Qualic-B board. And then they pick 2 at-large community members who are independent. So they can't be employees and they can't be current board members. So they pick 2 at-large community members to be the independent directors. And this board will meet once per year. It will review its financial statements once per year, as that's what they're doing, because they only have 1 transaction per year that they have to do. They approve their financials, they meet for 10 minutes, they sign off, and they're done. That's it. And that entity is called the Qualic-B Board, and their name is the Graceville Pre-K through 5 Qualic-B Inc. That's their legal name. In your case, I just called it LCSD Qualic-B, and you have the name, whatever name you want to choose for it, that's up to you. It's totally optional. But that's correct. So there is a special board that is required in these transactions because you're a governmental entity, and as a governmental entity, you're not legally allowed to participate directly. You must use it through a third-party intermediary, which exclusively exists to support the school district. It has no other purpose.
Yeah, I also have 2 more questions.
Yes, ma'am.
Air the room here, but I put them on procurement hat again. So I assume that you are the vendor of record for Jackson County. Is that correct? Are you in contract with Jackson?
That's correct, ma'am. I am their consultant, and I provide ongoing support after closing, and I don't charge any additional fee for that beyond the consulting fee that was charged at closing.
Was that a competitive process? How you choose consultants? How the school district would choose a consultant or choose attorney legal firms? Is that going to be a competitive process that we have to go through according to the federal guidelines?
No, you do not have to do that. Consultant selection is a personal, you can talk to a lot of different consultants, but you'll find that 95%, there's about 60 of us in this industry. There's only about 2 of them that will do any rural work at all. And none of them will get on a plane and come and travel and actually meet with you and help you during this process. So I'm going to give you an example. So before I started as a consultant, I was actually a client on a Newmark cash credit transaction. And I was working with one of the leading consultants in the industry. And he thought that his job was to get me allocation, that was it. And that's exactly what he did. He did about 40 hours of work, earned a fee of $250,000, and was done, and never heard from him again. I think I learned from that experience. I had to do all my own projections, all my own support work, all my own analysis. I had to do my own transaction entries, everything as the CFO, as that client working on that deal. And I learned from that experience that's pretty poor service, but I find that most consultants, that's really all they think they're in business to do. So I'm very hands-on. I provide high level service for my clients. I think my clients they pay a pretty steep fee for these services, even with my discounted fee at 2.5%. And I think clients deserve good service. So I'm old-fashioned. I'm a CPA by profession. I learned a long time ago, if you take care of your clients will take care of you. That's rule number 1. So, in my particular case, I believe that clients deserve good service, and they deserve help, and they deserve ongoing support. So that is what I do. I can't speak for other consultants. I can only speak for myself. But in terms of the federal program requirements, you can hire any consultant and attorney you want. There's no restrictions. It's not a public bid process. This is not a direct federal program. This is an indirect federal subsidy program through the tax credit, through the tax code. And therefore this is not a federal grant. It works sort of like a federal grant, but it is not a federal grant. Not in that sense. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, you did. Thank you so much.
Mr. Davis, on board there, you've got 15 million, and on more like 24 million, for savings. That changes every number on the board, correct? If you have.
Can you repeat that? Sorry, I'm gonna turn up my I'm gonna turn up my speakers here so I can hear you better. I'm sorry.
I said on this screenshot here we had, you got that for 15 million at the top.
That's correct. Yeah, I assume 15 million. So if I can find, this is a $20 million new market tax credit transaction. So $24 million in project costs, that would get us to a $30 million. That would get us to a $30 million new market tax credit transaction. So if I could find $30 million, let's just model this here and just show what this would look like. I'm not going to change the underlying numbers here, but I'm just going to change the fact pattern here on the variables pieces. So that would increase the subsidy to $5.142 million. If we could find it, if I can find it. Yeah, it's not guaranteed because there's lots of other projects, but you at least have the dollars that if I can find it, that I know that we can make it happen. So, but just to be conservative, I modeled it at 20 million, and if we get 30 million, then that's great. You'll get a lot more subsidy that way.
How, Eric, how competitive are we going to be competing with other rural areas? Like, I know there's a finite amount each period or each season or each funding cycle. Do you anticipate if we go in this next cycle, there be highly competitive?
It's always competitive. So the general rule is that under the current $3.5 billion limit, which has not increased since 2008, it's been the same number since 2008. In general, there's about 230 transactions that are closed every year across the United States. Okay, so going to a $5 billion limit will increase the number of transactions to about 420 transactions. It's about a $12 million average. That'll give us a lot more transactions. And then for every transaction that happens, there's everybody who wants allocation, the 20 projects that want allocation, only one's going to get funded. Now that's in general. So if you narrow that down further and you eliminate the metro projects, which is where there's the most competition for allocation, and we go look at rural projects, then you go to a probability of about one in three or so for rural. If we add the underserved category on top of that, now we're rural underserved. And Treasury says that CDs must fund at least 30% of their allocation for rural underserved state projects. And those are the projects that are the hardest to find for CDEs. So we go from a probability of 1 in 3 for a standard rural deal, and now we're looking at a probability of more like 80%, 80, 85%, 90% for a rural underserved deal. So in terms of ranking, there's different rankings out there that are, not published, but generally speaking, rural healthcare, rural hospitals are always number one in terms of deals. They have a 95, 98, 99% probability of being funded. Then below that, you've got rural manufacturing, it's about the same. So it's about 95, 98, 99%. And then below that, you've got schools and rural education projects. And those are generally 90, 85, 90, low 90s% probability in rural underserved states, just because there just aren't enough good deals. And since you're building something which I think is a really good project, building a vocational building for vocational training programs, that's going to be a real big priority for CDEs because they really like community benefits and things that will help create education and job training in the community. And so I think that our probability of success is at least 90%. It's not 100% because there's always a lot more projects out there than there is allocation available. But with a 40% increase in allocation and a really good project, I think we have a very, very good shot at getting this funding. It's not guaranteed. So my fee, for example, is totally contingent upon being able to get the funding for you. If the funding doesn't come, then I don't get paid. So, and you don't have any other cost either. So in that sense, everything is, you know, it's totally performance based. I have to perform and I have to get to the allocation for your project or nothing else happens. But I don't generally take projects unless I think there's a very high probability of success. And I personally work almost exclusively on rural underserved state projects. That's pretty much all I do, which makes me unique in the industry because that's all I do. And so I have a lot of deals. I have a lot of deals and a lot of good projects out there that will get funded. And I think yours is certainly near the top of the list.
One of the questions, you know, when you and I talked before, you asked me about what kind of project could we put it, and I mentioned vocational to him just as a starting point. Because I mean, we got some property behind the new high school, we could build a few extra buildings, but obviously not in. I wouldn't think in the neighborhood of $3.2 or even $5 million. So, did I hear you say correctly? We would not be locked in using all those allocations for that build. We could, whatever you build, when you get through, you can use the other unrestricted.
That's correct. So let's say the cost of building it is $2 million. Okay. So, and that includes equipment and everything else as you're going to build a wood shop or a metalworking shop or whatever, or a home ec program or whatever you're going to be building inside there, and other things, and desk and furniture, etc. So let's say it's $2 million. So I have 3.278 million dollars in cash. That would mean the district would get the difference, $1,278,000 as a reimbursement for prior costs incurred, and then that would be available for the district for any purpose that it wanted to use it for.
Is the 4-year spending restriction, does that apply to that leftover money as well?
No, you can spend that right away. But yeah, they're going to want it spent. They're going to want it spent within a year. So, so for example, with the Graceville School project, they did a 100% reimbursement deal. They were fully reimbursed. They had no additional cost to pay. So in their particular case, they just took the entire subsidy as cash and used it to pay off debt.
Okay, because we have numerous projects. We have a football field house we want to finish.
Yep.
We love, you know, and I'm not speaking for the board here. I'm speaking with them. We have some softball needs. We had to relocate the softball field, and still we think we still have money left over. But I want to make sure I heard you clear. The money, leftover money, has to be spent within 1 year or 4 years.
It has to be spent within. It has to be spent within 18 months. So when we do this deal, you're going to have a defined project budget. So if you're building new buildings, if you're building a new football building, you're building a new baseball field or new athletic fields or whatever you're doing, we have to have in order to close, we have to have a defined budget, a general contractor hired, architectural renderings, engineering, permitting, all that has to be done just prior to closing for you to receive the funds. And then those funds will be dispersed out of a construction draw account to pay for those costs as you incur them. So you simply incur them, general contractor sends you an invoice, and just like you did with the school, I'm sure, and then it's paid from that construction draw account.
So do the funds have to be spent within 18 months, or what if they're obligated?
They have to be spent within 18 months of closing. So if we close next year, let's say we close next year in March, let's say it was today, you would have to spend the funds by, what would that be, September 2nd, 2023.
How far is it between the time you are you're going to get the money that you're made, you're told you're awarded, you're going to get the money, and then you get the first draw? You can have the draw right at closing if you've already got costs that are in. If you got projects that are already under construction, you can get the draw at closing right then and there. Okay. It's like a long.
Usually draws are paid out. Yeah, draws are usually, when you have money in the construction draw account, the general rule is that it can be dispersed no less frequently than monthly. So you can do it once a month. But you can always take a disbursement at closing immediately. And most deals have that happen. That's in most transactions, that's what happens. There's a disbursement happens immediately at closing. And then
This would apply, Eric, to exist, let's say we have some items now that we're trying to pay for.
Mr. Mayor,
I got my facilities guy, he's got a question for me.
Mr. Mayor, we have a building that we got concrete poured and it's a steel construction building like vocational wing. Could we use this money as the vocational wing and put that money towards that, finish it, and then have the leftover?
yes, you can. We just have to, one thing I have to have when I start working on the marketing is I have to have a detailed project budget. So CDs will always ask me, what are you going to use the money for? And one of the things that I'll need your help with is saying, okay, if you had $3.278 million, how would you use it? And that's where I would need your help to define that. What specifically the scope of your project?
So as far as the ranking, if you had a committee or whoever the group is that ranks that, are we gonna have to justify 3.2 million in costs for a vocational building?
No. If the actual cost to build is only 2 million, then the rest will be reimbursed to the school district in cash at closing to be able to use for any purpose you want.
I just wasn't sure, do we have to justify putting that whole amount in the vocational building up front for ranking purposes?
No, I need a construction budget, and that means you'll have to have a general contractor hired, and you have to have a construction budget number and a general contractor hired, and renderings and everything else that you need for permits, and the permits have to be issued, and you can start construction that day. Or if you've already started construction before that, then we'll reimburse you for what you've already paid for that. That project's already under construction.
Gotcha, thank you.
Once you, how do you go about finding out? I know it takes 6 months to turn loose and all. Are you in contact with the consultants and all, when you'll know, yes, you'll be able to do this, or no, you will not be able to do, you're not awarded this? I mean,
Right, so-
about how long or closing.
Yeah, so we're expecting this coming year about 90 CDEs to win an award in August this summer. And before that happens, what I do, even long before that, I put together what I call a project cut sheet. And the cut sheet is the marketing document that I use, and I get that out to CDEs and your sources and uses, and then a preliminary project budget. And I start marking that to CDEs basically as soon as possible. Like this is March, I probably would like to start marketing your project by the end of the month, most likely. And start getting it out to CDEs and say, hey, here's our project. We're looking for allocation the next round, and I'd start scheduling calls and doing calls with multiple CDEs and trying to talk to as many CDEs that are interested as possible. And then the awards will come out in August, and before COVID, and I think this year after, because of the vaccine, we always had 4 conferences a year. And so there'll be a conference probably in September, and all the consultants and all the CDEs in the country gather in one place. It'll probably be in DC. And that's where I call it the meat market. That's where you're just meeting with I do as many meetings as possible. And because I have a lot of deals and a lot of rural deals, in particular, I do a lot of meetings, with CDEs. So I'll do like 16 meetings back to back, and you get only half an hour. I'd be presenting this project and any other project that I had that I thought was interesting to them. And that would be where we would have our physical in-person meeting. And then after that, after the conference is over, we follow up. And as I said, CDEs will take about 3 months to get serious. So they probably will be serious about actually committing to deals in October. And then we'd probably start working on closing in November, and we close in February, most likely, something like that. Did I answer your question?
Eric, Jody again.
Yes, ma'am.
Let's go right back to the very start.
Yes, ma'am.
On the contract, are there any upfront fees that the school will need to, do we need to do a contract with you? Will you send us a scope of work or what your services are going to be and outline those? How does this work? How do we contract with you or another consultant? How does that get started?
Okay, sure. Great question. So I'm a CPA, and as a CPA, I'm required to have a written engagement letter. So I have a standard 8-page engagement letter that's written in what I think is pretty clear English. And you review that engagement letter and you sign it, and then you become a client. I don't have a retainer. I used to do retainers, but I'm at the point now where I don't think, especially with your deal, I don't think we need a retainer. So there'd be no retainer or no fee that would be required. And there's no fees that you'd have to pay until we actually have a term sheet in hand from a CDE and from an investor. So that will be the first time there will be a fee that would be required. And so each CDE has a retainer fee typically of $25,000, and that's a deposit. And the investor, except for Truist, all investors except for Truist have a retainer deposit of $25,000. Truist does not have a deposit. And that will be the first time that you actually have to write a check for anything. Those costs will all be reimbursed to you as a credit at closing. So beyond that, the only other things to be concerned about in terms of potential costs that you'd have to pay out of pocket, all which would be reimbursed to you at closing, would be the typical what I call our quad B council calls it the Holy Trinity. I kind of think of it as the unholy Trinity. It's the standard documents that are done in a real estate transaction that are required for legal purposes for closing is a phase 1 environmental report, a Alta title survey, and an appraisal or valuation of fair lease value. So none of those costs have to be paid before closing. They can all be paid out of closing proceeds, but you never know the third-party person that you're working with, if they have a retainer. Some do, most don't. But if there was one, then there would be a potential cost that you would have to pay before closing, but that would simply be reimbursed. So in terms of cost to me, there's no cost for hiring me to be your consultant. And there's probably little or no cost for any other third parties that would have to be paid before closing, other than the $25,000 retainer deposits that have to go to the CDEs and any other investor other than Truist. I model Truist as the investor. They don't have one, but US Bank, Wells Fargo, they all have $25,000 retainer deposits that are also required. So that's really the only cost I think you'd have. That you'd have to pay, and again, that would be reimbursed to you at closing.
And like the attorneys, would they, typically, has it been your experience that they charge retainers?
No, ma'am, they don't. The only reason that you would have an issue with in terms of fees with attorneys is if we were working on closing and we had CD term sheet in hand, we're starting working on the closing process, and we're getting ready to close, and then you decide to back out for some unknown reason. That's an extremely rare circumstance, especially since you're self-leveraged and we don't have a borrowing issue here. You're not taking out what we call an upper tier loan in this circumstance. So therefore, if you were just to pull out like a month before closing for some unknown reason, because certainly we know from the Jackson County School Board case that the transactions are legal in Florida and the structure certainly works. So we know that already. But if you for some reason decided that you didn't want to do this, we're already working on closing, then you would have bills from these attorneys who are starting to do work because they get paid. In all new market tax rate transactions that close, those fees, and I've highlighted the 450 here, they get paid at closing out of the new market tax credit funds. But if for some reason you were to back out, then as we're working on closing and getting close to closing, then you would be billed by attorneys for their work that they've done for you on your behalf. My fee, for example, only gets paid if we close. So if we don't close, I don't get paid. CDE fees only get paid if we close, but if you don't close, they're going to keep their deposits as damages. So that would be the only circumstance where you would have any fees that you would have to pay out of pocket in a normal transaction.
Thank you, Eric. I just wanted us to the board to, this sounds like a no-brainer, but I want the board to understand there are some upfront things that it's gonna cost the board or the school. You know, and also, of course, I'm interested in the contracting phase of it and how it's gonna work. So, thank you.
Sure.
Other questions? I know it's a lot to chew on.
That's what these all, hey, I do presentations all the time. There's always lots of questions. I welcome questions. The more questions we can ask now, the better we're going to be in the long run. So.
If you could zoom that page as well.
Yes,
You
I
want
will do
to
that
talk
right
about it?
now.
You know what, we have any more questions, we'll ask you.
Okay.
I see you move to that one.
Yeah, this is this crazy looking flow chart here. Okay, so unless there's any other questions on the sources and uses, I'll go through this next document here. So this is the new market, this is the classic new market tax credit flow chart, and it's based on the numbers that you saw on the previous page. So the first step is that we have Truist Community Capital as our investor, our tax credit investor in the transaction. And they're going to issue a $15 million bridge loan for costs that were incurred with building the high school. So they're going to make that bridge loan to the school district. That's step number one. Then step number two is the district will loan $15 million to the investment fund, which is owned by Truist. So Truist gives us $15 million. We in turn loan the $15 million to Truist. And this all happens by wire immediately at closing within about 2 minutes. But mechanically, this is what the structure looks like. So that $15 million is our source of leverage, and these transactions work on something called the leverage structure. So then we have $5,928,000 of new market tax credit equity coming from Truist at step 3. So now our investment fund, which is owned by Truist, has $20,928,000 in it, which is the exact same number we had on the previous slide. And then it's going to in turn make a loan to this entity called the sub-CDE. And the sub-CDE is owned by our CDE. They own 99.99% of the sub-CDE, and the investor owns 0.01%. And they do that so they get paid. They get paid first before anybody else. So they get their $1.7 million fee, and that goes over here to the CDE. So now we have $20,928,000 minus $1.7 million, or $19,228,000. And so we have our $15 million leverage loan. I think I have a math error here of 50,000, but just please humor me in on the math error. So we have $15 million here as our leverage loan, which is the $15 million we had up above, and that's our A note. And then our B note, which is the new market tax credit equity, is $4,228,000. So now we have $19,228,000 in cash that is distributed to our Qualic B. And our Qualic B is as I said before, is a separate entity with its own board. It's a type 3 nonprofit supporting organization that exists only for the purposes of this transaction and to support the school district. Qualic stands for, it's a new markets term, it stands for Qualified, Active, Low Income Community Business. So if you want to jot that down, you'll hear me say it a lot. But again, Qualic, Qualified, Active, Low Income Community Business. And I just called it LCSD. You could call it Liberty County School District Qualic if you wanted to. As long as the Florida Secretary of State will accept it as a legal organization name, it's fine. But it must have the term Qualic in the name. That's the only requirement. So from the previous page, we have $18,278,000 in project costs. And then we have our transaction fees down here, my $500,000 consulting fee, and then the lawyers and the accountants $450,000 fee. So $950,000 in transaction costs. So now we have the $19.228 million in project costs. So what is this Qualic entity going to do with this $19,228,000 it has? The first thing it's going to do is it's going to pay $15 million on a reimbursement to the school district. That's the very first thing it's going to do. And it's going to reimburse the school district for the costs that it incurred related to the day loan. So that's the first thing it will do. It will sign and it will do the reimbursement in exchange for a long-term lease of the assets that were purchased with the $15 million. So in this case, it will be the school, as it was with the Graceville School in Jackson County. So it's going to be a long-term lease. The school district will in turn issue a lease back. We'll get a lease back of that building and we'll be able to operate it. So this does not change. This is only for tax purposes. So fee ownership does not change. The school district will continue to own the school as is without any changes. But there is going to be this lease back structure that will exist, that will be set up, and there will be a lease, which I'll model on the next page. And that lease will have a 30-year term, but practically speaking, the transaction has a 7-year compliance period. After the compliance period is over, then that lease, you'll just dissolve that lease, and that'll be the end of the structure. And you'll dissolve the quality. But for now, now the school district has $15 million sitting in its hands. That $15 million is back, and then it turns around and it pays it back to Truist, and now the one-day loan is extinguished. It's gone. No longer, debt is no more. It's done. So what do we have left? So now the entity will pay 9 transaction fees. The quality will pay transaction fees, and again, it's all handled in the wire room. It's not actually someone writing a check for this. We'll pay the transaction fees of $950,000, and then it will pay. In this case, I'm just doing it for the vocational building. It will pay $3.278 million in costs to build that building. Now, if the actual cost is $2 million, as we talked about on the previous page, then this number would be $16.278 million, not $15 million. The $15 million would still be repaid back to Truist up here, because that's the same amount we had here, but there would be another bar out here that would say Liberty County School District retains $1,628,000, or $1,278,000, sorry, which can be used for any purpose it sees. That's what it would say on that last bar. But in this particular case, I have not modeled that, but that's what it would look like. So when we're all done, the quality fee has no cash left. It has zero cash. And it must, but because of the new market tax credit structure, we have to maintain an annual payment structure. So let me go through the unwind process here for a second, and I'll go on to the next page. So after the 7 years is over, Truist has already received all their benefits from the tax credit transaction. So they've already received all their tax credits. They have a liability on their books for this NMTC equity. They want to get rid of it. So they will give the district a put call option agreement. It's in the signed documents that you sign it before closing. It says that when the transaction unwinds, we will give you a put option, give us $1,000, and we will unwind the transaction. So you give them $1,000, they give you the option at 7 years after closing, you give them $1,000, they unwind. So the investment fund dissolves. The CDE has already got their money, so they're dissolved, now they're gone. And so all we're left with is this qualic fee board. Well, the qualic fee no longer has any reason to exist, so it's gone. So all that happens is at that point is that the $3.278 million that's sitting here on the quality fees books that was used for that will simply, and the building that was built will simply transfer to the district after the unwind is over. And all we're left with is the district. So we kind of go back to where we start when the unwind is at the end of the 7-year compliance.
Question, Eric.
Go ahead.
Okay, I think you might have already answered this. The lease, the long-term lease, and then the lease back.
Yes.
What if the CDE went out of business? Just say they went belly up in the 7 years. What happens to this agreement with Liberty County?
Right. So if the CDE goes out of business, that wouldn't have any impact, because Truist is who's going to drive this, because the investor is the one who gets the benefits. So once the transaction closes, the CDE is largely gone. All you have to do is send them the reports, and that's it. But if the CDE were to dissolve, then this section would still exist because they got paid at closing, but they would no longer be here when the transaction unwinds. So in that respect, it doesn't make any difference. The CD would still have a bank account, but that's it. But we've never had a CD go bankrupt or dissolve in the history of the program, because CDs want to do more deals. So, for example, there are 242 registered CDEs that are registered with the Treasury Department. There's going to be about 90 of them are going to win an award. So CDEs, especially the ones that always win awards, will never dissolve because they want to keep winning awards. If there was one circumstance where there was a small bank in Georgia which did a few deals, and they were a small financial institution, and they got taken over by the FDIC before the compliance period ended, and that was the one case where we had a situation where the investor was no longer here, but instead what ended up happening was that in that particular case, the project sponsor ended up just giving the FDIC $1,000 in that transaction.
Is there any downside to this for Liberty County school system, the current school district to go into this? Do you see any downside?
No, other than these deals are really complicated, and I'll need help from your team to be able to work on this. And then there's a lot of moving parts involved. It will take time it will take staff time to do it. And it will take, the quality board has to meet and has to sign all the documents. But those are the real downsides. That's why this program is really popular, because people want the free money. You're not a for-profit entity, so there's no income tax liability here. If you were a for-profit, then it would be income tax liability to deal with. But since you're a nonprofit entity, that's not a factor. So no, there really are no downsides. That's why this program is that's why there's far more demand for new market tax credit transactions than there is supply of dollars in general.
Anybody got any other questions? Oh, it's a lot.
It's a lot.
All right. Do you have another screen, Eric, that you?
I do have another screen. Yes, I do. So I got one more screen, and I'm going to go ahead and zoom this out for you.
Okay, thank you.
So this is this is just the cash flow, how the cash flows work during the compliance period. I'm going to blow these up so you can see them here. So this is the lease agreement, kind of the lease we were talking about. So the district would be required to pay a lease payment equal to make sure that the qualic can pay an interest payment back to the district. And the interest rate on these transactions is always 1%. So the lease payment that's structured the payment amount will be based upon what's necessary for the qualic to pay the interest payment at 1%. So the loan amount from the previous page is $19,228,000. So that means an actual loan cash payment is required of $192,000 a year. So I just modeled it based on that, just to give us some room to work with here. So we'd have roughly a lease payment of $200,000. There'd probably be an annual payment that would come out most likely right around December 10th of every year. That would be paid from the school district to the qualic. The qualic in turn is not allowed to hold on to cash. It just can't hold on to anything more maximum than $10,000 at a time. And the only thing it's going to have to do is pay professional fees to an external CPA for their 990 tax return. Or any audited financial statements. But as on the Jackson County School District deal, there was nothing to audit, as I argued, as a CPA. So there's nothing to audit. So they agreed that we would just do the 990 tax. So I put in a $2,000 budget to pay for that 990 for the qualic board. So now the qualic has $198,000 in cash it can't retain. So the only thing it can do with it is pay it to the CDE at 1%. So it pays $198,000 to the CDE. The CDE in turn is not allowed to retain or hold on to any cash. It must distribute it to the investment fund at $198,000. And in turn, the investment fund is not allowed to hold on to cash either. It can't hold on to any money. So it must make a distribution back to the school district. So Truist will require about $100 for the wire fees, approximately about $100 for the annual wire fees. So that's why there's a service fee out here to Truist Bank. Out of the investment fund, that's how it'll get paid. And then the investment fund will distribute the remainder of the cash, was $197,900 to the school district. So at the end of the day, the only cost the school district has on an annual basis is about $2,100 for this transaction during the compliance period. So if you want to think of that as an ongoing cost, it's $2,100 for 7 years. You know, just under $15,000 that the district would have to pay in cost during the compliance period. But that's about it.
So for the term of the 7-year compliance period, you're looking at 14 grand plus.
For that entire amount, yes, but about $2,100 a year. That's correct, roughly.
Okay.
And that can all, and the tax return fee, the fee for the tax return can be reserved up front, so the district wouldn't have to pay any money for that at all. It would only have the $100 if that's desired.
I want to piggyback the question off what Jody said. She was asking about a downside. Has there been any instances with any school districts where there's been any kind of problems or allegations of impropriety on behalf of the district or anybody involved where it didn't go right?
Yeah, so I'll answer it the way that Matt Fuquay did when I started meeting with the Jackson County School Board. He said the first time after he met me, he went and he looked up new market tax credit fraud, and he couldn't find any. There's been no cases of fraud ever prosecuted. As a matter of fact, there's never been a recapture or any litigation at all in the history of this program. None, not once. There have been companies, for-profit companies, that have sponsors that have filed for bankruptcy, but that does not trigger a recapture or an unwind. So in the entire history of the program, there's not been a single IRS audit or any other compliance problems that have come up where there's been any cases of illegality or fraud or malfeasance or anything else that's related. Not in the history of the program. Doesn't mean that it won't happen with somebody or some transaction. There are always consultants who are far more aggressive than I am, who push the envelope more than I do. And I can't speak for them, but at least as far as I'm concerned, all my deals are pretty straightforward.
Okay, I'm gonna ask a very personal question.
Go ahead.
Have you ever been accused of any kind of fraudulent activity? With any
No,
kind
sir.
of money issues?
No, sir. No. I have never been investigated. My license is issued by the Oregon Board of Accountancy, and I have never had a complaint, dispute, anything in my 20-year career as a CPA.
You ever get caught for speeding? Just play it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eric.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, any other questions? Okay, so next step, Eric, would you send us an engagement letter to review and to possibly let the board look at that?
Yes.
Let our attorney look at that.
Of course.
Summers, and then move forward from there.
Okay. I'll make sure you have that by tomorrow.
Okay, awesome. Any other questions, board? Go ahead.
I think, and I'm going to speak for Jeff, he is coming up with a good thing. I think we're going to need a workshop. And we probably need to go ahead and start planning. This is going to be an ongoing project. And definitely, I know we can't make decisions, or I don't know if this is going to even require attorney. I'm going to lean to you. Stop me if I'm wrong here, please. Is this going to require a vote to move forward on this, or is this just a motion? I mean, is it our motion?
I think it needs to be put on the agenda.
Okay, it needs to be put on the agenda. And I think it's real important for all of us to see this engagement letter, and maybe do some checking around.
100%. I think we need to vet this.
We need to vet it.
With each other.
Yeah.
And before I would like for us all to feel good about it before we put it on the agenda. and try to have most of the questions answered
Yeah.
in a workshop setting possibly. And then when we all feel like we all get thumbs up, put it on the agenda and go from there. But that puts it, hopefully that gets all the questions answered prior to the vote.
Yeah, and I just, so we can be
Yeah,
able to really
100%.
talk about this thing and know what it's gonna entail. I mean, you know,
Everything.
what's the
Correct.
plan gonna look like? Yeah, I
I
mean,
agree, I agree.
yeah, and who our project manager is gonna be. I mean, for the school, you know, we're gonna need somebody working on this and, I mean, I know it's gonna be a team effort, but we need a project lead
Well,
on this.
I'm glad you said that. One question I had about the nonprofit that you develop.
Yes.
Is there, I know typically, and I'm coming from a church background, you know,
Mhm.
I'm a pastor as well, so.
Yeah.
I came into a church that was already a 501c3. But you said they do a 990, which is for nonprofits on the tax deal. Is that something that would need to be one of the earlier things so you get nonprofit status? I mean, sometimes that can be a lengthy governmental process.
Right, so that's a good question, and that is what our quality council does for you. So he will organize your 990, you will tell him who you want on your board,
Okay.
we'll define the name, then he'll get that organized and incorporated with the state of Florida, and then do your articles of organization, and then get all the other documents done, and then actually filing with the IRS for nonprofit status is he does that for you as well. He's a tax attorney, so he does that as well. And that, I mean, he has 990, he has applications for nonprofit status that's gone back, that are still in process from a year and a half ago, because the service is just so backed up. But all you have to do in order to close is just file with the IRS. That's all that's required for closing.
Okay.
You don't actually have to have the 990 letter, but he specializes in nonprofits. That's what he does. So he files, he does, Alan does probably 10 nonprofit transactions every year.
Okay.
Time frame, though, he said he's gonna send the engagement letter tomorrow. What kind of time frame do we need to meet to be eligible for the next round?
What deadline?
What deadline?
What deadlines, Eric, we're trying to figure out how much time that the board needs to discuss. What kind of give me a deadline of when we need to be ready?
Well, we're only in March and the awards won't be out till the summer. So I would recommend personally that I have a cut sheet to market to CDEs by mid-April, preferably. So if you were to sign an engagement letter, we'll need some information preparing the cut sheet marketing document, and I'll share it with you and we'll review it together and make sure it's what you want to say in the document. But it would be nice to have it signed and approved by the end of the month, if that would be possible. If not, it can go in April. I think we can I can still market the project even if it takes me until mid-May to have your approval to send it out. But sooner is always better.
But we need to be diligent with the time to do that.
Yeah, sooner is always better is the answer.
And will you be sending us examples, maybe to guide us through this, or, once and if we sign the engagement letter with you, I mean, we don't want to be poking around.
Well, yeah, so let me just say this, that you are certainly welcome to talk to Jackson County School Board, and they can tell you how their transaction went. We have a transaction we're working on right now with Jackson Hospital that hopefully, knock on wood, will be kicking off here for starting closing in hopefully next week. And we're talking to other organizations in the area as well. So, and I have several referrals I can give you. I started my business fairly recently, as I was a CPA for 18 years. So I've closed 5 transactions. You're welcome to talk to some former clients and current clients if you want about what I do, and I'd be happy. I'd give you one company's in Panama City. They closed a deal in December. I've got a company in New Mexico that you can talk to, and then you've certainly got Jackson County that you can talk to as well. And I've got a hospital in Wyoming that you're welcome to talk to if you really want to.
Are there, I don't want to say cookie cutter, but are there forms and things that we, you know, I assume that you will send is, or is
Yeah,
it?
so, you know, that's a good question. So, yeah, so as far as the transaction documents are concerned, that's why that's why there's all these lawyers involved. They're the ones who have to draft the legal documents. The good news for you is the Jackson County School Board documents are public. So because they're a government entity, they're public. So if you really want to review them, we can get those documents for you with their permission, of course. And you can actually see the documents and review them. I think they had 62 legal documents for their transaction, which is pretty light. Most transactions, I had one transaction that closed in December that had 160 legal documents. So every transaction is going to be a little different. But if you want to model based on Jackson County School Board's deal, we can certainly get those documents, and your lawyer can have fun reading the long set of legal documents that are involved if you want. Most of them are not very exciting,
Dry reading.
but you're welcome to review them in advance if you want to your heart's content. That would be my suggestion.
Okay. All right, so you'll send me that letter of engagement. You have my email.
Yes, I do.
And then what I'll do is I'll distribute that to the board, and
Okay.
we'll start that conversation.
Sure.
Workshop on demand, whatever.
Okay.
We kind of start that process.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Davis? Any questions for us?
I want to get more definition on what you want to do with the funds, and we'll want to talk about that. That'll be my big question. But I don't have any questions at this time directly for you. But I will, assuming that you want to go forward, I'll have a lot of questions.
Sure.
But I'll need to.
Absolutely. All right.
Thank you so much, Eric. You've done a great job. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Have a good evening.
Mr. Chair, I do have a question. As I've said, we probably need to have some workshops on this. And
If we move forward, he's gonna want to know exactly what.
yeah, so what do y'all, I mean, we can talk and I mean, we need to work in April is right now.
Yeah. So we got a few more weeks with spring break.
Yeah.
Everybody knows, and then we got last week. I would recommend and again, this is going to require us to meet a little more often. But for the return, it's worth it. I'm encouraged. Y'all saw what the numbers turned up to. I mean, this could be, I know, Kevin gave us a list of all of our facility issues. Remember that? We were just scratching our heads talking about how we can, this is one of those things that absolutely, and again, this has to be a board decision. One of my visions is behind the new high school, behind the vocational wing. We've got a little bit of property, a little strip there to do some, you got that whole slab that's there now. I know Tyler put a pole over there. So we got some area over there we can do a few things with, creative. But it also have quite a bit of money left over to finish the field house, to finish the stuff at the softball field, and anything and everything else in our facilities that needs repair, restoration, and have money left over. And I mean, even where over $1 million closer to $2 million. So I mean, I think reasonably we could build some nice vocational areas over there in addition to what we have. We can enhance what we have, as far as equipment. We put in the $150,000. I hope we're gonna get it this year. The governor told me this morning, y'all leave K-12 alone. I appreciate it saying that. I'm not overly optimistic. I hope they work out us to be able to get that money, but I believe we got some opportunity to really do some good things. So I'm okay with meeting as needed and as often as, you know, I know that I'm preaching to the choir here, but we need to do what we need to do to get rolling.
Yeah, we do, and I think, you know, having a good plan, and, you know, even a timeline, we need to start setting some timelines for ourselves, goals, we need, you know, what, and how we're gonna meet those goals. I mean, this is, and I will go ahead and disclose, I have talked with Jackson County. Even he told me, he said, after you explained it, you'll still go home and scratch your head. You know, and I've done some research a little bit on the internet, you know, looking at what this process is, and takes a lot of work. And I just want everybody to understand, this is not something we can just, you know, sign a piece of document and it's gonna take care of
It's gonna be
itself.
much more than just a tip.
This is rolling our sleeves up and getting to work and down in it. And
He
so,
said April, because so for that, is that where he needs some of those projects?
I would
As far as-
assume
yes,
so,
sure.
yes.
And that's something we need to talk about. What can we sell the best as far as a main project? And again, what I told him was just my knee-jerk response. Okay, he said, what are your needs? And I said, well, I want vacation center. That's a huge thing.
A question
But it don't have to be that.
question I had, he think we could go back and include the vocational building. I guess we got something over there to finish.
Correct.
How much of that vocational building cost? It costs us $1 million to move it over there, is that? Can that be included in there?
Are you talking about ROTC building?
Yeah.
I'm gonna answer,
Is
I'm
that
gonna
what
say
he's
something.
counting as is that what you're talking vocational?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think he was talking
But
about.
I wasn't talking about the
Oh,
ROTC.
I thought,
But I know what you're saying, don't count that out, because I asked that question of Jackson County. He even mentioned FEMA, some things that happen through FEMA and things like that. So, you know, talking more, and I mean, I had a 20-minute conversation with Chris, I'll be honest with you. So, you know, he gave a lot of information, and he's actually on that board that has to be, they put him on there. He's a school board member, he wears 2 hats, school board member, and he's also a CPA. So he's on this board that has to meet, they have to meet every year, you know, and he said it's not labor intensive, but as you can see, there's some,
Has to be done.
you know, it has to be done. So anyway, he has a lot of knowledge about it, and I'm sure he's not the only one, but you know, we've got to get our, you know, I know you guys have a lot to do, but to me, this is very similar to writing a grant. And we've got to market this thing so we can be competitive.
Yep.
So, you know, I'm open to meeting as often, or you calling me as often as you need me, you know, whatever, you know, I think we need to workshop this thing.
What I can do is get the engagement letter. That can be maybe our first workshop is let's go through that, let Jackson look through that as well.
Okay.
Make sure we're crossing every T and dotting every I, so to speak on that. And then maybe that first one, go over the engagement letter and then look, let's pick a project. Maybe, because I'm sure that some of that's gonna be encompassed in that. Let's go ahead and pick what we want to call it or what we're asking for. And make sure that, like you say, you gotta sell something that's worthy of that. That was a little bit of my rub, was if they look in here and say, well, how much do y'all, we've all kind of sat in front of these kind of ranking things, even with Oxford School and the new high school, they go, well, how much is it gonna cost to build it? And you go, $500,000. Well, do you need this much more, you know what I'm saying? So we've gotta make this a Mac Daddy thing, whether we use it or not, and not trying to be deceptive, but, you know, kind of pie in the sky to begin with, to be able to ask.
In my opinion, what you need, similar to what he had in the flow chart.
Yeah.
You know, and the direction of, you know, where you need to be by when. And there's all kind of questions that's gonna come out, like, how much money can you spend on administration? I mean, is that, is there, I mean, there's gonna be a lot of questions that are gonna come up. But, having a little flow chart, you know, like he had, as far as when you need to do what, by, when.
Right.
I can start developing that.
Yeah.
I can start developing that tomorrow when I get that, and then what I'll do is maybe shoot y'all out some emails on that, and what you think, and then maybe I'll even put some dates and what needs to be discussed at those dates.
Absolutely, we
I
got
can
to
only
have that.
imagine, I think he said after he gets that letter of engagement, he's gonna have a lot of questions. He don't have any right now, but he's gonna have a lot.
I think
His
his biggest one that he said was on what the project is.
Yeah.
So that's, we need to be in agreement.
You gotta know how long it's gonna be before you gotta create a board meeting.
Right, right.
Right. And and I don't know how that was put together in Jackson County, I can find out for sure, but, yeah, we've gotta have a timeline, we've gotta have a project plan and be ready to roll and be competitive.
Well, that was the thing I was just thinking about is he stated that, I think it was
August,
August, when the next round
Yeah.
is basic to start. Well, you know how long it is from now till August? You're about 5.5 months.
Well, and he even said he can start marketing it in April, right?
yeah,
April
he
and
said
May.
he could
So
get the cut
you gotta have
sheets.
all of your projects already defined, identified. You have to have all of your documentation, all of your construction contracts, everything already done. And, I know some of that's already in place.
So, yeah, I wanna know if we have to hire a CM or can we contract it out? Because if you hire CM, they're gonna charge you 7%.
Mhm.
And you don't wanna, I mean, I know he said a project, but you don't wanna go in there and spend all your money, then you won't have nothing to do nothing else with.
Right,
You gotta think about that now.
because the other is, you can have some of that free
Yeah,
too.
so you might only, I mean, once you apply for it, you get that money no matter what your project is. That's what he said. So if you wanna do $1 million project and have 2 million left, that's what you gotta determine, how much you wanna spend and how much you want left.
But you gotta, another thing, and that's one reason I'd really like to talk to DOE, because I'm just being, and maybe I'm being overreaching here, is because this money is going to come in our coffers. So all of our administrative guidelines have to be followed. If that money falls within our coffers, and eventually it will come in. I mean, we're gonna spend some money up front, I understand, and then get reimbursed. But we gotta be careful when you say, don't know if we need a CM, or I wanna make sure we follow all the guidelines, so we don't get an audit criticism 3 years down the road, and you go, whoa, well, you went and bid it out. This is where I'm going. I'm trying to look 5 years out, 7 years out.
Their biggest scrutiny comes in on FDFP money. That's where their biggest scrutiny.
DOE's does,
Mhm.
yeah.
On the
okay.
money they give.
On the money they
They
give us,
give,
but
right.
if there's other money coming in, I just wanna make sure we.
And I'll give you an example what I'm talking about, like the 1.5 mil levy for special facilities. When that comes in, they tell you what you can do with that, but after that 3 years past your school is done, you do with it what you want to.
Yeah,
But within the line of capital outlay, you get that. But we'll definitely make sure that everything is good. But that's the biggest scrutiny is on FDFP money, student funding. That's where they are the biggest. And we should do that all.
I can tell you right now, if you get in with DOE, you cannot finish that field house or build softball field house.
Well, I understand that.
So, I mean,
Okay.
because it's gotta be tied to a classroom. We might have to put a classroom out there, we might have to say, Ms. Sewell's classroom. That's how you can finish that field house with money we already have. All you have to do is put a classroom in. It's all tied to a classroom, FTE.
We get no money for.
It's all student stations.
Okay.
That's what it's amounts to.
Right.
That's the money they give you. Like Mr. Petty said, money that we get somewhere else. They really don't control it. Now, they control how we spend it and how we gotta bid this and bid that. That's control guidelines, but
This was where
That was
This is a
why.
total investment.
But you're right, Jody. We need to make sure that we will. We absolutely will.
I'm looking, making sure we don't get an audit criticism.
But there's gotta be, Kevin brought up a good point. Do you go hire a Culpeper type entity, as a CM?
7%.
And know that right there is coming off, or do we contract it ourselves? Do we become the CM? You know, we have board policy that covers that. That was one of, we do now. That was one of, on the operational audit.
Right.
Was saying y'all needed to have some stuff that garners being a CM,
Right.
that's in play, that will be in place by the time this rolls around.
Okay.
So that's a good question, because that's a high percentage of a project, which is less money here. Now, you got people that do that, and of course, it's one less thing or many less things for us to have to do, i.e. the school, you know.
The timeline he gave, said closing.
But we're
Finish in February, right? If I remember that right. So that would be
probably
a
need
couple of months from when the closing would start, and you would know, all right, it's coming, right?
Right. And I guess you would do these bids with contingency on availability of funds, right? Or are we gonna go ahead and pay
You
out?
gotta come up with a project.
Gotta come up with a project.
Yeah,
I'm gonna show you, for instance, that building we already got set up there, it'd be easy to turn into vocational lab. You still talking $2 million. You know, building right now is about, commercial wise, about $400 a square foot. It's $395. So you talking, it might even be higher than that now. So you know, you use that concrete slab of that building and finish closing it in, because that's all that new high school is that same building. It is, it's a red iron. It's a red iron building with block made inside. That's all it is, pre-construction material, pre-manufacturing in. So, you know, you can close that in, and that would save you slab, beam, roof. You still got all your electrical, plumbing. You have to step off to the side to do your plumbing for your bathroom, but other than that. So, you know, you can eat up your money quick if you choose the wrong project, and won't have any leftover to do anything else.
well,
Construction, that RTC building was about a $4 million building if we would build it and still move it over there. Cost us $1 million to move it, a little over $1 million to move it, saved us $3 million. That's the reason the board decided to do that. So you look at that building, there's your $4 million building, so, you know, I'm just trying to help you far as, I know you want to do other things with it, so don't jump off in there and say you're gonna build a $4 million building.
I think the next workshop we have, you'll be there.
I will go ahead and do that. I'll get that tomorrow and try to kind of put things on the calendar, maybe some deadlines, shoot that out. Y'all give me your feedback, and we'll do that.
And be thinking projects. You know?
Kevin's got that thing. I'll attach that. If you'll get that to me, I'll attach the things that we're talking about we were needing, we didn't have money for as well. You know, of course, we prioritize those things, I believe.
Yeah, that'd be good.
It sounds too good to be true,
It does.
but it's true. It's a
As
real
long
thing.
as none of us wind up on 5 o'clock.
That'd be your lawyer. It'd be your lawyer.
You liable, sir.
My understanding,
I'm gonna try to do everything I can not to.
you won't have any money left over, but you'll better finish a bunch of projects.
Yeah.
Right, that's the thing.
Yeah.
You got that 18 months to spend it. You're gonna have to get, that's why we need to make sure we know what we're doing and when we're doing it and how long it's gonna take to do it.
that's a very short
When
time.
he said that 3 months to finish, there's no way we can do something in 3 months.
Yeah.
We got,
Well, he said 18, didn't he say?
then he said, then he come back and said 18.
18 months.
Yeah.
Originally, he
Spend,
said
not
3
obligated,
months.
spend.
Yeah.
But he said as soon as, I guess, as soon as the awards, he knows we're gonna get it, we can go ahead and
We
start
can go
the
ahead
project.
and contract
Yeah.
So you,
or engage.
And that could be 6 months before they
Just
6
say-
months even
oh,
start.
yeah.
So,
How long, does any of y'all know how long our, say, Culpeper, once you bid something out, you can keep using them for a certain amount of time?
yeah,
If I
It all
understand
depends
right.
what our engagement letter.
And then, with, Greg Kelly and them, Mr. Dan Rutherford, if we could not have to bid it back out again, that saves a lot of time.
Well, no, that saves a lot of money too, because every time they rebid it, it goes up.
But you still have to pay them their goods.
Instead of paying their cut, you're going to have an architect, no matter what. They gotta, because he said, just, you know, he drew up, I mean, you're gonna have a set of documents showing what you're gonna do.
Absolutely.
I'll call.
And so that takes time.
Yeah.
So if we can have a workshop very quickly, so we can decide, so we can get them rolling, or whoever, I don't care who it is. Somebody's got to get rolling. You don't get a set of plans next week.
Do y'all want to try to workshop next Monday? Before or after the meeting? It's a short meeting.
Yeah, let's do
We
it.
got a 5:30 meeting, so
Y'all
You wanna
do
do
it
it after?
before or after?
you want to do it after, do you?
Let's do that.
Yeah, we'll do it after. I'll give everybody time to get here.
Yeah.
Why don't we just go ahead and I'll get Renee, if we'll just go ahead and do that. Right now, I won't put on there, but we'll go ahead and, we'll call it, see, we're inside of a week, so it'll be just an emergency workshop. We'll have to call it an emergency workshop for next week,
Okay.
immediately after the meeting, to discuss new market tax credit.
Any other questions? Motion to adjourn?
Second.
You have any questions, Mr. Singleton?
He said, go ahead and do it.
He's supposed to be here.
Tim, what's the project total looking like for the hospital?
They're talking about, $6 million.
To build a hospital?
Six-
Your money out of that.
six of this money?
Build a hospital,